Hello, it's me again, and you again, right? And this is talk number two, and I'm glad you're with me. And I hope this is a better or improved version. For one thing, I'm now sitting in a squeaking chair, which hopefully is an improvement. But I still have a lot to learn, since this, for example, is my second time to do this particular slide, since my first time disappeared into the proverbial ether somewhere. So, this is talk two, as I said. And last time, we left Dante in the woods of error, in sin. And he was trying to get out, and he was prevented by three animals: a lion, a she-wolf, and a leopard. And that was kind of mean to leave him there for a whole week or so, but that's what we did. We did that, didn't we? Okay. And if you remember from last week, we mentioned that Dante, in part at least, took these animals from this passage of Jeremiah, chapter 5, verse 6. Therefore, a lion from the forest will attack them, a wolf in the desert will ravage them, and a leopard will lie in wait near their towns to tear to pieces any who will venture out. For their rebellion is great, and their backslidings many. And so here is Dante with all these animals, and not very friendly animals in this woods and everything, and he is in deep trouble. What's he going to do? Well, by himself, he's not going to do anything. That's, of course, part of the point of all this. And so he does see something interesting. He sees a person, a man off in the distance. He says, wow, I am going to go up and see this person. What the heck can be worse than these animals? And as he narrates here in Canto 1, starting in verse 64, when I saw him standing in this wasteland, have pity on my soul, I cried to him, whichever you are, shade or living man. No longer a living man, though once I was, he said, and my parents were from Lombardy, both of them Mantuans by birth. I was born, though somewhat late, sub Julio, and lived in Rome, where good Augustus reigned, when still the false and lying gods were worshipped. I was a poet, and sang of that just man, son of Anchiades, who sailed off from Troy after the burning of proud Ilium. But why retreat to so much misery? Why not climb up this blissful mountain here, the beginning and the source of all man's joy? Well, I think we know why. And Dante explains it, and then Virgil is going to rescue him. Now, I might go back here I can't, but just the story that Dante gives of who he is, born sub Julio, etc., would, by almost any educated person of his time, actually several centuries up until really almost our present time, would clue people in immediately that was Virgil. Virgil was well known and regarded up into the 20th century, and probably in some places still, I think. So, Virgil is the greatest Latin poet and author of the Aeneid, and he appears to come and rescue Dante. Virgil symbolizes something. He symbolizes human reason, and explains that he's been sent to guide Dante away from error. However, there's no easy way out. The good news is, I've been sent to help you. The bad news is, I'm not going to just take you up that mountain. You're going to have to literally go through hell. Hell being recognition of your sins, and purgatory being repentance thereof. Well, that's, what can you do? Dante decides, what the heck? I guess. So, the question is, why Virgil? Well, Virgil was one of the widely known Roman poets and the author of the Aeneid. And what the Aeneid is all about, we'll get to in a minute. And he is in many ways a symbol of what Dante would like to be, the author of a famous Italian epic. And of course, Dante managed to succeed at that. And Virgil becomes, as we mentioned before, a symbol of human reason, the perfect guide to the horrors of hell. What should be noted that Virgil, in the story of the Divine Comedy, only goes so far. He can guide Dante through hell. He can getting through purgatory, but he cannot get into heaven. The only way he's going to get to heaven is by grace, symbolized by Beatrice. And in none of this adventure is Dante succeeding only by his own efforts. As I mentioned, Virgil is a famous poet of the Roman era, in the time of the 1st century BC, and the Aeneid is the great national epic of the Roman Empire. It's their national origin myth, sort of combining all the stories that we tell of our origin as America into one really epic story. And here we have Virgil in this painting reading the new poem, the Aeneid, to the Emperor Augustus, his wife Livia, and daughter Octavia. And see, Octavia is so overwhelmed by the poem that she fainted. Well, what's this all about? What's the big deal here? Well, here's the story in very condensed form. It all starts in Troy. We all at least have some idea of the Trojan War. And how this started was the gods were having a wedding party, Greek gods, of course, and they didn't invite Eris, the goddess of discord, for very good reason. She's the goddess of discord. I'm not going to invite her to a party, but she comes anyway. And being the goddess of discord, she's going to cause some discord. What she's got is this golden apple. And she throws it in there, and the apple has the inscription, "To the fairest." Well, there's 3 rather vain goddesses, actually pretty darn beautiful goddesses, who figure that's their apple. And that would be Juno, Hera, depending on the Greeks have one name for gods, the Romans another. But anyway, I may go back and forth, who knows. Anyway, so one of them is Juno. Another one is Venus, and then Athena. Of course, Juno is the queen of the gods. Venus is the goddess of love, and Athena is the goddess of wisdom. Well, fight about to break out, and Jupiter, the king of the gods, says, "What the heck? I'm going to get an impartial judge to figure this one out." So he drops in on Troy, and there's a prince of Troy by the name of Paris. And he says to Paris, "All right, guess what I've got for you? I got a great job for you." And sure enough, Paris has got to give the apple to somebody. And gee whiz, what would you know? That the goddesses are going to resort to bribery to get him to give them the apple. And Juno promises him to be king of just about everywhere, and Athena promises a lot of wisdom and stuff like that. And then Venus says, "Hey, I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world." And Paris says, "That sounds like a deal to me. Here's your apple." And so Paris gets Helen. Well, there's only one catch to this wonderful story of bribery and whatever. There's Helen is already married to the king of Sparta. Well, that's not going to stop, of course, Paris or Venus, and they abduct her and she becomes Helen of Troy. the Greeks are a little ticked, and they form an alliance. They're going to go fix this mess. Well, they didn't fix it for very quickly. It was a 10-year war, finally solved by the Trojan horse. And I know you know the Trojan horse, so I'm not going to talk about that. But when but after they do their number and they're destroying Troy, someone escapes. Aeneas, along with his father, who he carries on his back, his son, and a significant group of followers. Not his wife. His wife perishes. Now they're going to have this great adventure because the gods promise Aeneas, certain gods anyway, Mercury and such as that, promise that they're going to be resettled in a new land to the west, and they're going to make a great nation. So you can follow this arrow, and they're going all over the place. It takes a long time to finally make it to the midpoint of Italy. And I won't go into all the story. It's a great story. I will talk about one adventure, but if you want to know more about this, by the way, you might check Wikipedia. Wikipedia has a synopsis of this, and it's all rather important to understand some of the points that Dante is making and some of the characters he's going to bring up. Anyhow, so at one point they make it to Carthage. Carthage, as you might know, will become the great enemy of Rome in the future. Well, Carthage has Queen Dido. Her husband has died, and she's made a vow to stay a widow in honor of her dead husband. Well, that worked until she sees Aeneas, and she decides he's quite the hunk, and heck with vows, heck with all that. I'm going to have an affair with this guy. And, well, that's not a great idea, because the gods, some of them at least, want Aeneas to quit hanging out in Carthage and go do what he's supposed to do. And Dido shouldn't have done this anyway. So finally the gods get Aeneas to leave. Dido is so heartbroken she commits suicide. But anyway, Aeneas makes it to Italy. He has a number of adventures there, but the most important adventure he has is that he needs to go talk to his dad about things. Well, that's all very well, but Dad's dead. What are you going to do? Well, what you do is that you go visit your dad in the underworld. And that's book 6 of the Aeneid. And this trip forms a lot of the, so you say, the furniture of Dante's hell. Takes some of the monsters and all that. And there, from his father Anchises, Aeneas gets this great prophecy of Rome, that Rome is going to be given dominion without end, an infinite reign. So that's part of the attraction of the story to the ancient Romans. So there you have it. That's at least part of the story of the Aeneid. And you may wonder, well, makes you wonder if there are any other connections with Virgil and Dante and Christianity. And indeed there is one that's mostly forgotten now, was certainly very prominent in ancient times and in medieval times. And this idea that Dante probably inadvertently prophesied the birth of Jesus. And this was seen, or thought to be seen, in one of his poems. He wrote a series of poems called Eclogues. In Eclogue 4, he makes some predictions that sound a bit like a prediction of Jesus. We can read along here. This is from Eclogue 4. Now the last age of the Communion prophecy begins. The great roll call of the centuries is born anew. Now virgin justice returns in Saturn's reign. Now a new race descends from the heavens above. Only favor the child who's born, pure Lucinia, on whom the first race of iron shall end, and a golden race rise up through the world. Now your Apollo reigns. For Polyneo in your councilship, the noble age begins, and the noble months begin their advance. Any trace of our evils that remain will be canceled, while you lead and leave the earth free from perpetual fear. He will take on divine life, and he will see the gods mingled with heroes and be seen by them, and rule a peaceful world with his Father's powers. In times past, this was taken very seriously as a probable prophetic utterance of Virgil's. Modern ages think this is a bunch of baloney, most modern scholars. But perhaps recently, others have said, well, you know, there is a potential connection. This potential connection is the Jewish faith. Unlike what is thought by many, the Jewish religion was not an obscure religion set off in one corner of the empire. No, indeed, most estimates of the population of the Roman Empire at the time of Jesus' birth was somewhere between 60 and 70 million, of which approximately 6 million were Jews, or about 10% of the total population. And they're scattered everywhere throughout the Roman Empire, just about. Indeed, in Rome itself, it's estimated that in the 1st century AD, there were about 50,000 Jews in Rome, or somewhere around anywhere from 3.5% to 5% of the population. With this in mind, some have postulated recently that Virgil knew something of the Jewish faith and Jewish messianic prophecies, and this inspired him to some degree to make this prophecy in this poem. Well, I guess we really don't know. That's certainly intriguing. So in any event, Virgil is going to be Dante's guide through the afterlife, at least hell and purgatory. And this is what he says now towards the end of Canto 1. And so I think it best you follow me for your own good. And I shall be your guide and lead you out through an eternal place where you will hear desperate cries and see tormented shades, some old as hell itself, and know what second death is from their screams. And later you will see those who rejoice while they are burning, for they have hope of coming, whenever it may be, to join the blessed, to whom, if you wish to make this climb, a spirit worthier than I must take you. I shall go back, leaving you in her care, because the emperor dwelling on high will not let me lead any to his city, since I in life rebelled against his law. Well, first of all, note that, as is going to be the case throughout the Inferno, Jesus' name is never mentioned. It's always some kind of circumlocution of some sort. And Emperor dwelling on high is one of them. And the spirit worthier than I, who's going to take Dante into paradise, is Beatrice. And following now, continuing in the verses, everywhere he reigns, and there he rules. There is his city, there is his high throne. Oh, happy the one who he makes his citizen. And I said to him, Poet, I beg of you, in the name of God, the God you never knew, save me from this evil place, and worse. And so the trip begins. And here is a model or mock-up of the structure of the afterlife as Dante sees it. Here is the entrance to hell, which we're going to come to soon. Hell is this hollowed out area, concentric circles, down, 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 till you get to the center of the earth, which is where the devil is. And then at the very center, you take a tunnel on to the South Pole, which is where Mount Purgatory is, the so-called seven-story mountain of Thomas Merton and others remark. Now, notice one thing. This is a sphere. The Earth is a sphere. And this dispels a very tenacious myth that the people of ancient times and medieval times thought the world was flat, particularly medieval people. They're stupid, superstitious morons who thought the world was flat. And that's absolutely not the case. All educated people, and even some uneducated people, particularly sailors, knew the world was round. And Dante puts this in his poem, and this is not some kind of revolutionary thing. It's just, okay, the earth is round, and here's the story. And now, notice purgatory, Mount Purgatory is on the South Pole. Well, the idea many people had was that most of the land was in the northern hemisphere, maybe all of it. They had a hemisphere of water, you have a hemisphere of land, which was the medieval, common medieval idea. And you couldn't get to the southern hemisphere because, as you know, the further south you go, the hotter it gets. And they hypothesized that you get to the equator, it's going to be so hot, perhaps even a sheet of flame, that you're just not going to get any further. This was disproven by the brave Portuguese sailors and navigators in a century and a half or so after Dante, where they went down, they circumnavigated Africa, went into the southern hemisphere, and got out to India. Now, after you do that, you can see this is reversed. We have north here, here's Jerusalem, here's hell, and here's the South Pole right here on top. Kind of different from what we usually look at. Here's the hemisphere of earth, hemisphere of water. So once you get to the top of Mount Purgatory, then you ascend through the various spheres of the planets. And then you go through the planets, go through the fixed stars, and then the prime mobile or crystalline sphere, then you get to heaven. And Paradiso is that getting to heaven in the third book of the Divine Comedy. The idea of medieval times, of course, was the earth was the center of the universe, and the sun, the sun was a planet that revolved around the earth. That was disproven, of course, later on. Copernicus, then followed by Galileo, put the sun in the center of the solar system. Well, many people say, and quite rightly, that this is sort of an earth not heliocentric, but a geocentric universe that put man in the center. And that's true, but that was not entirely a good thing. By the Aristotelian physics and philosophy of the time, the idea was that gravity was explained by like things attracting. Well, gross, hard, dirty things were attracted to Earth. So they fell down and sat on the Earth. And the idea being Earth was sort of the receptacle, the garbage receptacle almost, of the universe. And this was the center of everything imperfect. And notice, of course, at the very center of things in Dante's idea was the devil, the most imperfect thing that spiritual thing you could think of, really. And so the light, airy things went up to heaven, and everything beyond the moon was perfect. And one of the things that people were disturbed about with Galileo is not just simply that he talked about the earth going around the sun, but also that the heavens were not perfect. He saw that the moon had craters. He saw that Jupiter had its own little moons that revolved around that, and that got people really theologically disturbed. Well, Just a final thing I want to say about the canto, and this slide reminds me of it, that when we first meet Virgil, he said his voice had grown faint, perhaps from too much silence. And that's line 16. And the thought here is that reason had been so little used by Dante that it had become faint. And this is the concept that if you just keep ignoring your reason, your conscience is going to get quieter and quieter, which is not a good thing. Relieve you from distress, but you really want your conscience and your reasoning going after you. Now, the next slide, which I think is coming up, will be this Italian poet reading the Divine Comedy in Italian. And I think this will play in this show, and I think it'll play well. I hope it does. And you can listen to parts of it or just a little of it, but just the idea of getting to note how beautiful this poem is in the original language. And the original language has all these vowels that can rhyme and everything, which we can't do very well in English. So, and you notice this guy also is doing it from memory, which is pretty impressive. So here we go.
Nel mezzo del cammin di nostra vita mi ritrovai per una selva oscura e la diritta via era smarrita. Ai quanto a dir qual era e cosa dura e sta selva selvaggia e aspra e forte che nel pensier rinnova la paura. Tanta e amara che poco è più morte, ma per trattar del ben ch'io vi trovai dirò dell'altre cose chi vo scorte. Io non so ben ridir com'io ventrai, tant'era pien di sonno a quel punto che la verace via abbandonai. Ma poi ch'io fui al piede d'un colle giunto, là dove terminava quella valle che m'avea di paura il cor compunto, guardai in alto e vidi le sue spalle vestite già de raggi del pianeta che mena dritto altrui per ogni calle. Allor fu la paura un poco queta che nel lago del cor m'era durata la notte ch'io passai con tanta pietà. E quale quei che con lena affannata, uscito fuor del pelago alla riva, si volge all'acqua perigliosa e guata, così l'animo mio ch'ancor fuggiva si volse a retro a rimirar lo passo che non lasciò giammai persona viva. Poi che hai posato un poco il corpo lasso, ripresi via per la piaggia deserta, sicché il piè fermo sempre era al più basso, ed ecco, quasi al cominciar dell'erta, una lonza leggera e presta molto, che di pel macolato era coverta, e non mi si partia dinanzi al volto, anzi impediva tanto il mio cammino, ch'io fui per ritornar più volte volto. Tempera dal principio del mattino e il sol montavan su con quelle stelle che eran con lui quando l'amor divino mosse di prima quelle cose belle, sicch'a bene sperar m'era cagione di quella fiera alla gaetta pelle, l'ora del tempo e la dolce stagione, ma non sì che paura non mi desse la vista che m'apparve d'un leone. Questi parea che contra me venisse con la test'alta e con rabbiosa fame, sì che parea che l'aere ne tremesse, ed una lupa che di tutte brame sembiava carca nella sua magrezza, e molte genti fe già viver grame. Questa mi porse tanto di gravezza, con la paura c'uscia di sua vista, ch'io perdei la speranza dell'altezza. E qual è quei che volontieri acquista, e giugni il tempo che perder lo face, che in tutti i suoi pensieri piange e s'attrista. Tal mi fece la bestia senza pace, che venendomi incontro a poco mi ripigneva là dove il sol tace. Mentre io ruinava in basso loco, dinanzi agli occhi mi si fu offerto chi per lungo silenzio parea fioco. Quando io vidi costui nel gran diserto, miserere di me, gridai a lui, qual che tu sia, o d'ombra o d'uomo certo. Risposemi, non uomo già fui, e li parenti miei furono lombardi, mantovani per patria ambedui. Nacqui sub Iulio, ancor che fosse tardi, e vissi a Roma sotto il buon Augusto al tempo degli dei falsi e bugiardi. Poeta fui e cantai di quel giusto, figliuol d'Anchise che venne di Troia, poi che il superbo Ilione fu combusto. Ma tu perché ritorni a tanta noia? Perché non sali il dilettoso monte che è principio e cagion di tutta gioia? Or se tu quel Virgilio e quella fonte che spandi di parlar sì largo fiume, risposi lui con vergognosa fronte, o degli altri poeti onore il lume, vagliami il lungo studio e il grand'amore che m'ha fatto cercare lo tuo volume. Tu sei il mio maestro, il mio autore, tu sei solo colui da cui io tolsi lo bello stilo che m'ha fatto onore. Vedi la bestia per cui io mi volsi, aiutami da lei, famoso saggio, che ella mi fa tremar le vene e i polsi. A te convien tenere altro viaggio, rispose poi che lagrimar mi vide, se può campar d'esto loco selvaggio, che quella bestia per la qual tu gride non lascia altrui passar per la sua via, ma tanto lo impedisce che l'uccide. E a natura sì malvagia e ria, che mai non empie la bramosa voglia, e dopo il pasto ha più fame che pria. Molti sono gli animali a cui s'ammoglia, e più saranno ancora finché il veltro verrà che la farà morir con toglia. Questi non ciberà terra né peltro, ma sapienza, amore e virtute, e sua nazion sarà di feltro in feltro. Di quella umile Italia fia salute, per cui morì la Vergine Camilla, Eurialo e Turno e Niso di Ferute. Questi la caccerà per ogni villa, finché l'avrà rimessa nell'Inferno, la onde invidia prima di partilla. Ond'io per lo tuo me penso e discerno che tu mi segui ed io sarò tua guida e trarrotti di qui per loco eterno, ove udirai le disperate strida, vedrai gli antichi spiriti dolenti ch'alla seconda morte ciascun grida, e vederai color che son contenti nel foco perché speran di venire quando che sia alle beate genti, alle qua poi se tu vorrai salire, anima fia ciò più di me degna, con lei ti lascerò nel mio partire, che quell'imperador che lassù regna, perch'io fu ribellante alla sua legge, non vuol che in sua città per me si vegna. In tutte parti impera e qui vi regge, quivi è la sua città e l'alto seggio, oh felice colui cui vi elegge. E io a lui, poeta, io ti richeggio, per quello Dio che tu non conoscesti, acciò ch'io fugga questo male, e peggio che tu mi meni là dove dicesti, sì ch'io vegga alla porta di San Pietro e color cui tu fai cotanto mesti. Allor si mosse e io li tenni dietro.
So, did you get all that? I hope you did. Now, we're going into Canto number 2. And a whole day has passed, as the slide says. Dante's still in the woods with Virgil. Things start kind of slow. They're certainly going to pick up as we go along. Now, Dante is sitting here talking to Virgil. He's kind of getting second thoughts here. He says, well, you wrote about young Silvius's father, and that's a circumlocution about Aeneas. Aeneas is Silvius' father. Of course, he's talking about the Aeneid, who went beyond with flesh corruptible, with all his senses to the immortal realm. But if the adversary of all evil was kind to him, considering who he was, and the consequences that were come from him, this cannot seem to thoughtful men unfitting. For in the highest heaven, he's chosen father of the glorious Rome and of its empire. And both this city and her lands, in truth, were established as the place of holiness, where the successors of great Peter sit. And from this journey you celebrate in verse. Aeneas learned those things that were to bring victory for him and for Rome, the papal seat. Then, later, the chosen vessel Paul ascended to bring back confirmation of that faith, which is the first step on salvation's road. Now, when he's referring to Paul, he's talking, first of all, about a passage in 2 Corinthians, starting in verse 2, where he says, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things, things that no one is permitted to tell. Paul's being a little coy here. He's talking about himself, and he had an experience or vision of heaven. And there's also an apocryphal story from the 4th century about St. Paul having a vision of hell. And we're pretty sure that Dante knew about that also. So that is St. Paul. He's also referring to Aeneas up top. Then he goes on, Dante does. He says, but why am I to go? Who allows me to? I'm not Aeneas, I'm not Paul. Neither I nor any man would think me worthy. And so, if I should undertake this journey, I fear it might turn out to be an act of folly. You are wise, you see more than my words express. And Virgil certainly does, because Virgil's reply is this. If I have understood truly your words, that shade of magnanimity replied, your soul is burdened with that cowardness which often weighs so heavily on man. It turns him from a noble enterprise like a frightened beast that shies at its own shadow. So Virgil's saying, quit your pity party. Quit, saying this stuff. You're not really being humble or anything. You're just being kind of a coward, all this. Don't give me that. And then he says, let me tell you why I'm here. I didn't just come on my own power. That the story is that Beatrice in heaven saw the problem, and with the intercession of St. Lucy and of the Blessed Virgin, was sent down where I reside, which is limbo, which you're going to see in a minute, and said, please help this man, that he needs this aid or he's lost. Once again, Dante cannot get out of the woods himself. He needs the intercession from heaven. And so I'm basically that result of that intercession. So come and help me. And Beatrice was the one who appeared to me. And as we've mentioned before, just as Virgil is a symbol for human reason, Beatrice becomes a symbol of divine love in the Divine Comedy. And now this slide says that they only met once. I think most sources say they met twice, but still, they didn't exactly have a big relationship. And Dante uses Beatrice in a number of his works to represent all that is pure and beautiful in the world. And this comes from a medieval, in part, a medieval concept of courtly love that perhaps we'll talk about later on, but it's not something that we can easily understand in our modern parlance. Dante was married and had a wife and a family, that he can have this sort of mystical or courtly love to someone else. So here we have the characters in Canto 2. We have Dante, of course, Virgil, we have Beatrice, we have Virgin Mary, who's mentioned briefly, and basically it was the one who sent Beatrice with her intercession, as well as Saint Lucy. And Saint Lucy is a saint who was asked by the Virgin Mary to help Dante. We know Saint Lucy is the patron saint of vision. So Dante, get the idea that Dante's blind and Saint Lucy is trying to help him see. All right, now, next week, we're going to get to the gate of hell, and we're going to enter hell. So that should be, and it will be interesting. So see you next week, hopefully in person on either Wednesday night or Thursday morning. And if not, I'll see you in this presentation.